Yeah, Gray, since you weren't here last week, I don't know if you're a Emerson scholar, but
Of course. Are we all?
Don't they make radios?
They used to.
that's the guy.
Yeah.
First serious. So, it's the radio
He made a
series.
radio and Billy Philco made one too.
But so the
Don't mind me, I'll just-
no, I mean, just the highlights from last week on the first few pages are that, Emerson starts out, at the very top with the Latin, do not seek for anything outside of yourself. And so obviously this essay called Self-Reliance, he's making an argument that everything you need is inside.
I'd like to be a little contrary. I think it says, do not seek yourself outside yourself. It's the translations in the very, very back.
Do not seek yourself.
Outside yourself.
Yeah, good. Well, thank
Do
you.
not seek other things. You can seek other things.
Yeah.
Don't find yourself outside yourself.
Yeah, good. Thank you. That's helpful. No, that's good, right? And it continues in the second one, man is his own star. So everything that we need is inside. And so then our job as self-reliant human beings, Emerson says, is to say that, right? To let that which is inside out. So if you look at the very bottom of the first page, it's a famous line. There's a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him, but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till. So that seems a sort of a key Emersonian sense. That you've been given yourself, your DNA, your time, your place, so you got to make the most of it. On the second page at the top, there's a cool line, 4 lines down, when he says that the eye was placed where one ray should fall, that it might testify of that particular ray. And that's maybe interesting because Emerson is going to make the argument that, sort of from the outside, the ray comes in, and then we testify to it. Right? So self-reliance is really more like being a conduit, for the transcendent, for the God. Which he says 2 lines down from that, God will not have his work made manifest by cowards. So when inspiration hits you, you have to manifest it. So you can't, you have to say the unpleasant truth. And that's where this, if we can now go to something new on the, I guess it's the 3rd page, I think that's where we can start off from last week. Now he's going to talk about nonconformity. Do you mind reading that, Elaine, that long paragraph?
Oh, okay.
So this is, I think, new territory now.
Whoso would be a person, a human, a woman, must be a nonconformist. He who would gather immortal poems must not be hindered by the name of goodness, but must explore if it be goodness. Nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Absolve you to yourself, and you shall have the suffrage of the world. I remember an answer which, when quite young, I was prompted to make to a valued advisor who was wont to importune me with the dear old doctrines of the church. On my saying, what have I to do with the sacredness of traditions if I live wholly from within? My friend suggested that these impulses may be from below, not from above. I replied, they do not seem to me to be such, but if I am the devil's child, I will live then from the devil. No law can be sacred to me but that of my nature. Good and bad are but names, very readily transferable to that or this. The only right is what is after my constitution. The only wrong, what is against it. A man is to carry himself in the presence of all opposition, as if everything were titular and ephemeral, but he. I am ashamed to think how easily we capitulate to badges and names, to large societies and dead institutions. Every decent and well-spoken individual affects and sways me more than is right. I ought to go upright and vital and speak the rude truth in all ways. If malice and vanity wear the coat of philanthropy, shall that pass? If an angry bigot assumes this bountiful cause of abolition and comes to me with his last news from Barbados, why should I not say to him, go love thy infant, love thy wood chopper, be good-natured and modest, have that grace, and never varnish your hard, uncharitable ambition with this incredible tenderness for black folk 1,000 miles off. Thy love afar is spite at home. Rough and graceless would be such greeting, but truth is handsomer than the affectation of love. Your goodness must have some edge to it, else it is none. The doctrine of hatred must be preached as the counteraction of the doctrine of love, when that fuels and winds. I shun father and mother and wife and brother when my genius calls me. I would write on the lintels of the doorpost, whim. I hope it is somewhat better than whim at last, but we cannot spend the day in explanation. Expect me not to show cause why I seek or why I exclude company. Then again, do not tell me, as a good man did today, of my obligation to put all poor men in good situations. Are they my poor? I tell thee, thou foolish philanthropist, that I grudge the dollar, the dime, the cent I give to such men as do not belong to me and to whom I do not belong. There is a class of persons to whom by all spiritual affinity I am bought and sold. For them, I will go to prison if need be. But your miscellaneous popular charities, the education at college of fools, the building of meeting houses to the vain end to which many now stand, alms to sots, and the thousandfold relief societies, though I confess with shame that I sometimes succumb and give the dollar, it is a wicked dollar, which by and by I shall have the manhood to withhold.
Ooh, some edge in this paragraph.
He's nasty.
Right, isn't he?
Penurious too.
So them's fighting words again, right? Right, when he says at the beginning that nothing is at last sacred but the integrity of your own mind. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So Kathleen last week said afterwards, I don't know what I think about this Emerson guy. He seems to not value the past, right? And when he says, what do I have to do with the sacredness of traditions if I live wholly from within? Right? So that's where he's, giving us the beginning of this long paragraph, the main critique of himself and how he responds to it, right? The traditional church guy saying, well, that seems dangerous. What if your impulses are not good? And then he gets even nastier. Says, well, if I'm the devil's child, I will live then from the devil, right? So he's really poking people in the eye here.
I feel like it's just a call for integrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like at its best, he's just saying you have to mean what you're doing. And on the other hand, the argument is like you can discipline yourself to become a better person by taking on acts that are asked of you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I guess that would be the the argument against it, but I feel like he just wants total integrity in every action and thought.
Doesn't want anything done because somebody else told you to do it. Right.
Right.
To him, that's sort of a poisoning of yourself.
Mhm.
But he's disdainful of others doing anything too.
If they don't do it self-reliantly.
Well, with that, now I'm getting angry at this man because he's very vainglorious, he's very egocentric, he's selfish.
Mhm.
He's coming off that way. Maybe if it's as you say, he should say that, not make us decide that, because he's awful.
But he does say at the beginning, right, that the integrity of your own mind is the greatest, of the greatest sanctity, and everything else is secondary. So he's awful and he's inspiring at the same time. So it really depends, if you think about somebody who is a member of a church, and maybe you think about the 1830s, right, and that church is part of, sort of the American white supremacy system. And so you do things with that church, right? And everybody is a good old boy in the church. And here's Emerson saying, I don't like any of that stuff, right? You guys are all just following, the tradition which protects your life. And then the priest says, well, but, you're so radical. And Emerson says, well, it doesn't seem to me, right, as if my impulses are from below. It seems to me as what I'm trying to do is actually, do exactly what Jesus said, right? My father, my mother, all of this, I shun all of this when my genius, my God calls me.
But he paints over everything that like education in college and giving help to somebody that's going to go drink. I saw it,
Yeah.
it's you may be right, but he puts himself above everybody and says everything you're doing is stupid.
Yeah. That's what, in some sense, that's what he's doing, right? He's saying, when I look around, I see a lot of people following dead traditions and doing things because they're told to do things. And even if they are good things, it's actually, he's going to say that on the next page. I love this line. He says, for those people, 2 + 2 = 4 is wrong, right? They don't know that 2 + 2 is 4. They're just saying it because other people have told them. So he uses it as an example, just like, the philanthropist who's given money to the poor and now feels really good about himself. And I think Emerson would say, yeah.
So are you saying, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, the only part that really, or that confused me the most, I guess, was the part about charities and such, and whether, like you were saying, is it just, a criticism of people doing it like for the wrong reasons, because it's part of the social thing to do, and it's you're not giving to help somebody, it's more you're just like a gear in this institution, or you're doing it to feel better about yourself. But then the way he talks about, trying to withhold his dollar and he's tempted to like help somebody, like, I'm curious where, what exactly his perspective is, or where exactly he's coming from with that. Is it, is it about you should help yourself, buddy, or is it more about like, like he says something about I can't remember, I don't know what the line is about the institutions or something, as if they're just kind of fake or something to that effect. I don't know again, but like is it a criticism more of sort of philanthropy as supporting some institution that's just kind of sprung up in the name of helping people, but is really just another like do this, follow us, do it this way, with a facade of sort of helping people.
Yeah, I think when he says your love afar is spite at home, right towards the middle, that, and we all get all these philanthropic opportunities every day in the mail, right? And we'd like to give $1 to each of those. right? And so we're tempted, right? Because they're all doing good works. But they're sort of, I think what he's saying is, well, do you know what's going on in your cul-de-sac, in your neighborhood, right? In the square mile in which you live? Aren't there people who need you right here, right now?
But would he agree to help them?
No, that's what he said, I think, right? When he says the people that he belongs to, for them he will go to prison, right? So the people that he belongs to, those are the people, right, that he lives with.
Oh, so it's not a class, he's not looking at a class
No, he's
or
looking,
education level.
I don't think so. Right, so the people he belongs to, I mean, we all have people we belong to. And Emerson says, those are the people, right? They need us. We should be 100% there for them. And we're tempted to give money to people who are 1,000 miles away. And that's a good temptation in some sense, but he's saying, one day I'll be man enough to say, I got to focus, on the plot of land that I have, right here in Fort Collins or Concord or wherever I'm at.
Is that then the point of his, the example he gives of the man who's kind to people in Barbados, but is not kind to his own child or the person who chops wood or?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could buy into it if it's almost like substituting, helping the people within your circle, or even being responsible, to your own needs. Substituting those things with helping people afar, but I certainly just personally think that it's kind of like a limitation of development to stop at helping people within your own circle. And to me, it's almost like, it makes me think of the tribalism that I think a lot of political issues kind of are tied to, people don't see beyond their own tribe. And it's extending your compassion outward to just all life, all living things. I think it just can be, there's a healthy and responsible way to do it, and there's an unhealthy, toxic way to do it. It's more an abnegation than an actual, I don't know, that's just my opinion.
Wonder what he would do today. The number of needy people that are desperate is so much greater proportionally than it was even then. Wonder what he would think then. And would this mean, like, for example, our church and we have a relationship with a community in Haiti, and a lot of us have helped out a lot. Would he be disdainful of that because it's afar? And yet our people, us, the church, our church, us here in this parish, want to help that. Are we part of that? Is that part of us or is it not part of us?
Is he criticizing us or not?
Yeah. Is he picking on us or not?
Yeah, but I don't know. And I mean, I think just like with Emerson, he says so many things that, of course, you can't agree with all of them. So you certainly should push back against some of those. He might say, well, is everybody in your parish taken care of? Right? Are there people in your parish who are suffering right now? Right? And if there are people in your parish who are suffering and you're sending money to Haiti, it's not wrong to help the people in Haiti, but what about the person who's sitting next to you in the pew? I think that's where he's coming from. And that's why he says at the end, right? Of course, we're tempted to give the money to Haiti, and there's nothing really wrong with it because, right, as he says at the end, right, I succumb to it because that's a humane feeling to want to help. But I think he's always saying, well, what about the people that actually belong to you, that you see every day in the grocery store, that you see at work, that you see at church? Are all of those helped by you? And then, of course, if you were to project that out, right, if everybody were to act this way, then everybody were taking care of the people around him or her.
It was much easier in those days, it seems to me, to be self-reliant. You had a different kind of economy.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have the internet. You didn't have all this communication. This is a totally different context, I would have to say, than it would be today. And I can't help but feel that an underlying message may be that everybody should be self-reliant. If everybody is self-reliant, they're able to take care of themselves. So therefore, you don't need to have philanthropy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to have a tribe. I think this is very interesting. And again, it's a time and place article.
What came out of these philosophers early on were utopian societies. They developed utopias, and they built walls around them, and they just for themselves. They took care of themselves, but it was a walled utopia. It's like gated communities in Phoenix, and I mean, it's unbelievable to me. So is that what he's? That's what happened by the 1850s, 1860s. There were utopian societies everywhere.
Yeah, well, he's not part of those movements. I mean, just historically, that's not where he was.
But that's, if it's to find yourself and find those, your people, that's what it is, isn't it?
Yeah, and if you do that and other people do that, right, then you have this sort of libertarian let a thousand flowers bloom scenario, right? So you can get a sense that Emerson would be very happy with that. Like, we're doing this here. If you want to do something over there, hallelujah, right? I mean, you do you. And
I think we better read on in case he changes his mind a little bit. It's left me angry.
okay. Well, why don't you read the next one then? Yeah. Okay, yeah, John.
Virtues are, in the popular estimate, rather than the exception, but than the rule, rather the exception than the rule. There is the man and his virtues. Men do what is called a good action, as some piece of courage or charity, much as they would pay a fine in expiation of daily non-appearance on parade. Their works are done as an apology or extenuation of their living in the world, as invalids and the insane pay a high board. Their virtues are penances. I do not wish to expiate, but to live. My life is for itself and not for a spectacle. I much prefer that it should be of a lower strain, so it be genuine and equal, than that it should be glittering and unsteady. I wish it to be sound and sweet, and not to need diet and bleeding. I ask primary evidence that you are a man, and refuse this appeal from the man
To his actions.
to his actions. I know that for myself, it makes no difference whether I do or forbear those actions which are reckoned excellent. I cannot consent to pay for a privilege where I have an intrinsic right. Few and mean as my gifts may be, I actually am, and do not need for my own assurance or the assurance of my fellows any secondary testament.
Mike, can you read one more? And the next one has some famous sentences in it. Yeah,
You want me to read the next one?
please, yeah.
Just a one paragraph?
Yeah.
What I must do is all that concerns me, not what the people think. This role, equally arduous in actual and in intellectual life, may serve for the whole distinction between greatness and meanness. It is the harder because you will always find those who think they know it is your duty better than you know it. It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after your own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude.
Yeah. I do love the next sentence. The objection to conforming to usages that have become dead to you is that it scatters your force. Okay, so when you're, so this is, I think, again, more grist here for the mill. What he wants is, in some sense, probably what all the great men and women whom we admire have done. Right? I mean, any great new word that was spoken against, what were common usages at the time, right? So whether it's, Socrates or the Buddha or Jesus or anybody, right? They were nonconformists and they were whipped for it. And so Emerson is saying, well, I want to set my sights that high, right? I want to be like that. And I also want to, be like those people.
It's just, oh, go ahead, right?
I think he wants to be like Donald J. Trump.
Yeah.
I'm serious about that. I think this is very much, Mr. Trump would certainly agree with a lot of what he's saying.
Yeah.
And I, for one, it is definitely contrary to my personal point of view, and I think to the points of view of most of us who come to this church, I think it's basically look out for number one, and that will take the hindmost as far as the rest of the
Mhm.
people. And I guess I'm very surprised. I'm not an Emerson scholar. I think this is the first I've ever read of him.
Yeah.
But I'm surprised that a person with these beliefs has attained the prominence that he has in our American culture.
Yeah, I mean, he is somebody who influenced American culture for better and for worse, right? I mean, that's what's so interesting, right? The better, I think, is easy to see, right? When you think about sort of what boats he rocked at the time, right? I mean, he was famous as one of the few people who spoke out, publicly against the fugitive slave law and all of these kind of things, right? So he was very sort of, interested in the hindmost of his time, right? He was one of the great forces of abolition. But he also, and he talks about this later, right? He calls the Donald Trumps the bold sensualists who use his philosophy to gild their crimes. So that's the language he uses. Because I think, from my reading of Emerson, he would look at somebody like Trump and say, well, that's clearly not what I'm talking about, right? Yeah, because I mean, Trump clearly does not, keep in the midst of the crowd the perfect sweetness of solitude and the perfect. I mean, he is clearly driven, by his followers and follows his followers, and is very much a man who does whatever works.
I guess I would have thought that Trump, rather than following his followers, attempts to lead his followers, and attempted to lead those people on January 6th
Yeah.
to the Capitol. And then, when confronted with assertions that he had so done, denies it. Oh, no. I was watching television or whatever, or, I wasn't doing that.
Mhm.
I don't know. Anyway, I have not read this clearly, but I'm surprised at what I've heard so far.
My sense, I mean, I could be way off here. I don't know. My sense of Trump is that he would say that he believes whatever would get him people to follow him. So he does conform to, like, this is just my perception of Trump, is that he looks out at the crowds and sees, what can I say or pretend to believe that all these people will cheer me on for, or that the greatest number of people will. So he'll do and be for whatever policies or movements or whatever will get people cheering around him, will give him the most power. So he's not in the least independent. He completely just projects and perhaps even conforms in his own mind to whatever he thinks the popular opinion is going to be, and also shapes it at the same time. But I don't know, that's my perception, is that he really is the opposite in a lot of ways of being independent minded, and I don't know.
I would agree with this. I mean, that's the whole point of populism, is that you actually sort of follow what the population wants and you just articulate it, right? And then, but I mean, we all heard the speeches when he was trying out lines, right? Whichever line gets applause, gets recycled the next time around, and the line that doesn't get applause just gets dropped, right? So that I think Emerson would find lacks all integrity, because it's just doing what the people think, right? What the people want me to say. There is something about this Emersonian attitude that really lends itself to withdrawing from the marketplace, right? And so the populist is right in the marketplace and is whipping up the masses, which so the Emersonian self-reliant person would not want to do, right? Would look at this and say, I don't want to have anything to do with, like people chanting and people all doing the same thing. And so that's why he says there, right? It's easy in the world to live after the world's opinion, which is what the populists do. It's easy in solitude to live after our own. So it's also easy to withdraw, like Thoreau, right? And live in your little cabin. It has more integrity than being in the marketplace and cheering with everyone else. But that's also not the best thing. The great man is she who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. So that's somehow, right, being in the world but not of the world, right? You are able to be yourself and in the midst of the crowd. That's the balance, I think, that Emerson is trying to achieve here in these lines.
It leads me to think of the Shakers and some of those small communities that were developing in mid-1800s throughout. And certainly the Shakers had their own view about everything, and certainly had no children and so on and so forth. So it was very different, but yet they together all sort of bought into that. So it's the kind of, it's independence, but in a community. So a little deep.
Yeah, they had a strong sense of belonging, right? So these were the people they would go to prison for. And so there's a sense of that too. Yeah.
It's interesting, Greg, last week our discussion, and maybe it was, because it was based on the first paragraphs. There was a sense that people felt inspired to kind of for their own spiritual journey or their own journey as an artist or something like that. So that there's this tension between like, I feel moved through his words to have more courage to live my own individual life. And then at the same time, this feeling like, but if that person over there reads this and does the same thing, I don't want that person to, you know what I mean? Like the Donald Trumps of the world and things like that. So I personally was feeling that tension between like, I love this for myself, but I'm not sure if I love it for everybody else. So there is that, I don't know.
I think one of the big things that would be a contradiction, I think, for somebody to try and follow or claim to be like Emersonian is, the Emersonian point, it seems to me, is that all men and women, their best thing to do is to think for themselves. Like, it's not, I am the one who has the truth and I should follow my own truth. It's that everybody should follow their own truth. Like, that's the belief, which from that, it follows that I should follow my truth. Everyone should follow their own truth. Therefore, I should follow my truth. And you can't hold that belief and at the same time think that other people should just abnegate their own, wills and thoughts to yours or to some other follower or whatever.
To live in society requires a sense of community, a sense of togetherness. I mean, if you believe it's not worthy of me to stop a stoplight, somebody else does, I mean, we're gonna have chaos. I mean, it's just chaos. And at this time, they were living in little villages and woods and everything was easier, as far as people could be deflected. I don't know.
When you were talking, Mike, I was thinking what Emerson would find a healthy democracy, only one in which everybody gets to say whatever she wants, right? And people are going to say things that are very different, but that's what's going to make, this country, any democracy work. And I mean, he's writing at a time, right? You just have to think of Huck Finn, right? How Huck Finn grows up thinking, well, of course, blacks aren't equals, right? Because every church pulpit preaches it, every person says it, right? And so you have to have these outliers who are gonna, these gadflies that Socrates talked about before. They have to shake up these opinions. So because Emerson knows that he doesn't know everything, he needs other people to also be self-reliant. And now you have this interesting, back and forth where you don't have this conformity where it says, okay, whatever you say, leader. Yeah, it's a, and I think Emerson would say, right, if you drive through the red line, right, because you think it doesn't apply to you. I mean, he calls these people bold sensualists, right, who just say everything for myself. And he's going to develop that later on. He critiques that. Right, that's not self-reliance, it's just selfishness.
Okay, there's a big difference.
Right, and he calls that sensualism because it just, I want this, so I'll take it. That's really uninteresting to Emerson, actually. Right, to Emerson, self-reliance is this hard thing that, all the great human beings in history have done, right, who had to separate themselves from mainstream opinion and fire against it, and often got killed for it. right? But they were the ones that we now look to and say, wow, they moved history forward, right? Those were the truth speakers because they were unafraid to be nonconformist, right? And he talks about in the next paragraph, right, 6, 7 lines down, if I know your sect, I anticipate your argument, right? Well, I know you're an Episcopalian, so you're going to think like this. If you're a Baptist, I know you think like this. If you're a Republican, you think like this. And that's really uninteresting, right? And we all know people, you know exactly what they're going to say because, you know, they have that, you know, that flag on their lapel pin, or they've got, you know, this sticker or that sticker on their car. And that is not interesting. So if I just want to, you know, pull a few lines out of this next paragraph, right? When he goes below, if you go below the middle of that next longer paragraph, he's talking about these people, you know, whose opinion you already know. And then he says, this conformity, this is to the right, maybe 60% of the way through this paragraph.
What page are you?
Oh, the one we were just on already. I'm just skipping ahead a little bit in the next paragraph because just for sake of time. Right, and he says, this conformity makes them not false in a few particulars, authors of a few lies, but false in all particulars. Their every truth is not quite true. Their 2 is not the real 2, their 4 is not the real 4, so that every word they say chagrins us, and we know not where to begin to set them right. So, and I think, I mean, I know this from myself, and, you know, I see it every day with, you know, people I teach, that they parrot other people's opinions. And even if that opinion is true, right, you get the sense that you don't actually really think this. You don't actually really know this. You're just saying what the man has told you to say. And he's worried that that makes your whole life what we nowadays would call inauthentic, right? Because you're just saying the party line. And sometimes the party line is true, but sometimes it might not be true. And so if you're always parroting it, then you will never really say something. When you walk around and say, here is my number 2, you know, it's not quite right. So I think that's what he's worried about. So he's living in a world, and I think we still do this, where a lot of people just follow their echo chamber, right? Their little, you know, group that tells them what to think. And he wants to just shake that up. And that's why he talked earlier about the doctrine of hatred, you know, that you do have to hate those kind of things, and you do have to push against those things the way that sort of the great heroes of our tradition did.
It reminds me of people on both the left and the right. You'll have videos where, you know, like right wingers will go to campuses and they'll talk to liberals, quote, you know, and ask them about something they believe, and then try to pry into why. And then it's like, then on the opposite side, you know, you'll have somebody who's more liberal going to like a Trump rally and asking them what they believe. And then when they get into why, it's just, you know, this kind of, it amounts to because everybody else believes it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that all around.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it gets sort of amplified by only surrounding yourself with people who, you know, think like you. Yeah.
It's interesting though, because I feel like in this community, I feel like people have chosen this particular church because there's like a resonance there. Do you know what I mean? So I feel like reading it in this community is interesting because people here, it seems, I mean, that's why we're here too, is like people have kind of authentically chosen something. So there's an identification like for good ground. So I feel like, I don't know, when I read this, I'm like, it's not speaking like exactly for this group, because it is a really, like there are people who are actually authentically helping the people of Haiti, because I do feel like they belong to me.
No, I think you're exactly right. And that's why he says later on, right? So 2 people might do exactly the same action, right? But if the one is done, you know, authentically, right? So you can wear your Nikes and go to church and it's authentic, or you can do that and it's not, right? So clearly, he's saying you can't really tell from the outside, you know, whether you've got a self-reliant person or an other reliant person. It's about a way of being
Mhm.
where you choose things, and hopefully you're part of communities where people all chose,
Mhm.
of their own in a sort of authentic way. This is what it means for me to be who I am. And then it's actually interesting, right? Because in a community like this, people will have made these choices for different reasons. And if they authentically say, well, I'm at this church because of X, and then you can say, oh, well, I'm here because of Y. And now you got a really interesting, right, conversation.
Yeah, my perception is that, well, most of the people in this church do think for themselves, and that's part of what attracts people to it. So,
Mhm.
they know they're allowed to think for themselves, and they like talking to other people who think for themselves. So,
Mhm.
Right. And I think that's a sort of an interesting combination of a community of self-reliant people.
and they might agree on the same things. I mean, although they might have different reasons. It doesn't mean that, we don't, most of us want to support Haiti. It's just, we're not doing it just because the church wants us to,
And there's my sister who goes to a church with 5,000 people down in Denver, and they just switched to another one, just these huge churches, and everybody thinks the same sermon, and it's usually men that are giving the sermons. And so they've done nothing but find, I don't know how many big churches there are, but she seems to find them all. Oh, we have a new church. And
Well, they have these little groups in that trap people, because my daughter's doing the same thing in New Mexico.
okay.
And it's amazing.
And you could see how an Emersonian attitude would not fit with that kind of church. An Emersonian attitude would not fit with living in, Iran or in Russia, right? I mean, Emerson would be in prison in all the right places, right? He wouldn't fit in all of these organizations that require conformity and homogeneity. And I think that's what appeals to me about Emerson, that he is the one who would stick out like a sore thumb in that mega church in Russia, where.
What's so ironic to me is that a lot of these churches, some of them, a lot of them are very kind of nationalist, really, I guess you'd say, are all about America and American tradition. And yet, really, like this, would, I think, really push against a lot of their ways of being, wanting other people to conform and think the same, etc.
I think if you read Emerson charitably, right, then he is that antidote to mass culture, and these rallies or these mass sermons where everybody just yay. That's what he doesn't like. He didn't like it in his time, and he wouldn't like it today.
It's a different culture.
I think so.
Yeah.
I would say it's a non-self-reliant culture. It's a culture that preaches, conformity. This is what you wear. This is what you think. This is how you have your hair, right? And we see it in Iran, and we say, "Oh, this is horrible." But in smaller ways, it happens in this country too.
And that's why so many of the people in this Emerson group ended up in the Adirondacks, which is, out in the boonies, so to speak.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's the philosophers camp.
Uh-huh.
So Emerson was part of that group.
Yeah, he went to all these Chautauquas out there.
It's Chautauqua, yeah.
Was that kind of looking for solitude or looking for intentional community?
Well, it's looking at life differently, but in connection with nature
Mhm.
and recognizing how nature works and their relationship with it. And an ability to be out there, not listening to all the noise around you.
Where I do question some of this most is thinking of prehistory, actual tribes, and tribes that still are like in actual like hunter-gatherer tribe or something. It doesn't. I wouldn't point, at a tribe, maybe that's still living, and if everybody was conforming, we're doing the same things and say that, you're not being true to yourself. I feel like that's where there's such a different dynamic, and it's like the evolution of civilization, and theirs were two, I don't know, different ways of being. I feel like once you're in a civilized society, an educated society, not that tribal people are uneducated, but I think maybe you catch my drift. It's a different, there's different opportunities and challenges as far as like the right thing or the virtuous thing or what. Because I mean, you might not even have any concept, you know, in like a hunter-gatherer tribe, you know, like there aren't even that many other ideas maybe that there are to choose from. It's just kind of like you just want to become it. So I'm just saying I would point at those people and criticize them or say that they're, you know, advocating to the group because it's like such a different context.
Survival.
Yeah, we live in a context where there are a million choices, right? Yeah. There's one paragraph I want to point out on the next page, on page 5, right in the middle, and then we can stop right there. It's a really famous paragraph. And maybe it helps pull some things together. It's right in the middle. A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds, adored by little statesmen and philosophers and divines. With consistency, a great soul has simply nothing to do. He may as well concern himself with his shadow on the wall. Speak what you think now in hard words, and tomorrow speak what tomorrow thinks in hard words again, though it contradict everything you said today. Ah, so you shall be sure to be misunderstood. Is it so bad then to be misunderstood? Pythagoras was misunderstood, and Socrates, and Jesus, and Luther, and Copernicus, and Galileo, and Newton, and every pure and wise spirit that ever took flesh. To be great is to be misunderstood. Yeah, so, but I think this here you see sort of which models he is trying to follow, right? The Pythagoras, Socrates, Jesus, Copernicus model, right? The people who see something that's new and fresh and different from everyone else. And a lot of them paid with their lives, right? For their vision. And so that's where he's going with all of this self-aligned talk, is that you have to have the courage to say something that everybody will scorn. And the question is, how do you get there, right? And so you get there by going to the Adirondacks for a few months and just sitting there thinking and meditating. Then you're going back saying, here's what I found out. And then, you know, if you live in a healthy society, you get to do it. If you live in an unhealthy society, you get stoned or, you know, thrown back out. But it's that continual, you know, leaving society in order to figure out what you have to figure out, going back into society, tell, here's what I've learned, right? And then in a society where everybody does that, then, you know, hallelujah, right? Then you've got a great marketplace of ideas and we can have great conversations. But it's a risky business, the self-reliance business, as far as Emerson is concerned. Yeah.
You started to say something great.
Let's see. I was just remembering when we were at Clover Way, West Elizabeth, we used to have a certain number of yellow plastic glasses. Perhaps some of you remember.
Robin Williams.
Robin Williams, and among them, the reasons, 10 good reasons to be really. One of them was there's no snake handling.
That's the first one that comes to my mind.
Another was few aerobics, you know, stand up, sit, kneel. And a third was that no need to check your mind at the door.
Right.
And I think that is maybe what Mike was referring to, speaking of our willingness to be independent thinkers. I might say that he also included, as I recall, there was a line there again from Robin Williams. Doesn't matter what you believe, no matter what you believe, you find someone else to agree with you. So it almost seems like the opposite, but no need to check your mind in the door. But anyway, just a reflection on what it means to be invisible.
Yeah. Yeah, we can pick up with that next week if we want to start again next
So
week.
we have 2 more weeks. 3.
One more week, so we can start
last week.
because there's something else scheduled after.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give you a highlights tour of the last few paragraphs. He talks about, you know, what prayer should be. He talks about, you know, sort of more the transcendent notion, right? How, and this is actually really interesting when he says that when you're self-reliant, you're actually not doing anything yourself, but you're letting he calls it God, right? The one, the transcendent sort of work through you. That's what true self-reliance actually is. It's the connection, so the pure connection with the divine, not the one that's mediated, by the priest, by the church, but it's the one that you yourself make with the divine. And then he is confident that what's going to come out is going to be fine. Right? And if everybody were to do that, then, wow. And you've got a lively, lively group, which is sort of, what, Ray just said is sort of an Episcopalian ideal, right? That, people are going to witness to their thinking and their experience of the divine. And that is okay.
We'll do this next week.
Yeah, we'll do that.
That fits because we're gonna do the choir is doing an anthem of gospel music, Precious Lord. And it's really cool.
Tommy
It's
Dorsey.
It's really cool.
The Tommy Dorsey.
Yeah, it's not the jazz
It's Thomas Dorsey.
Oh, it's a different. Okay, I was
Yeah.
just.
I thought it was a
trombone
trombone
guy.
But anyway, that'll fit because that would be great.
Wasn't it Jimmy Dorsey?
Oh, was it?
Isn't that the band leader?
No, this
Tommy is
this-
a band leader.
This guy,
but trombone is-
Thomas Dorsey, who wrote this, is a black
He was a.
pastor.
Yeah.
He may have been Episcopalian, but it's really a good version. So.
Do you know the situation in which he wrote that?
No,
Oh my gosh.
tell me.
He lost, this is a teaser for this in the anthem next week. He actually lost his wife and daughter in childbirth. And he was just so shattered. And so his wife was giving birth, and I think
They both died.
they both died, and he wrote that song in the midst of his grief. Yeah.
Well, it's a beautiful. It's exciting to sing it.
And it speaks, whenever I play it for people, it just speaks to their hearts. Yeah.
So you play that.
Mhm.
See,
Nothing new for this one here.
So you're saying we hit Emerson's low point today?
No, not a low point. It's just,
Yeah.
Emerson is, and I think your responses are exactly on, because Emerson is sort of challenging our conceptions.
who is Emerson today?
Mm.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know that there's one person that comes to mind, but I think it's, college professors with integrity, right? Teaching their classes.
What about like Richard Rohr? Like, I feel like he's trying to get people to think for themselves instead of just following.
That's an interesting
That's true.
example, yeah.
I'm guessing.
I think Chomsky, at least some of the things he says about the education system.
Who?
Chomsky.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Right, no, there's some people who are rocking the boat, but they're like Richard Rohr or Chomsky, they're rocking the boat, from a grounded position. And I think this is what we haven't really gotten from Emerson so far.
We don't have the grounded part.
We don't, and this is where one can critique Emerson. He doesn't talk much about it, and my reading is that he doesn't talk about it because it's so obvious to him,
He's in it, yeah.
right? Because if you study Emerson, you realize he's read everything. He was probably the most educated person in the United States.
So he feels himself to be quite grounded.
And
Yeah.
because he's grounded, he can then leap off, right? It's
Well, that's what allows you to leap off.
exactly.
If you're not grounded, you're leaping into chaos.
Yeah, you're jumping off from nowhere into nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But it's so funny because like the part we read today, like, it could be perceived as like, because you're so authentically like a citizen of the world. And he's talking about, you're like, your authentic testimony is that we belong to each other no matter where we live in the world. And he made a criticism about geographic distance.
But I believe that, but that's why he's very disappointing to me.
Yeah, exactly.
He's a provincialist.
He's a small town guy.
Okay. Well, we'll do
Yeah.
this.
he might be, yeah. Although all the people that he is talking about, right? The Moses, Plato, Milton, Pythagoras, Jesus, Luther, Copernicus,
Yeah.
those were not provincial
No,
thinkers.
they were not.
And so he likes to think at least he's in that line.
Well, and he may be, but I think we're just, those of us who don't know him, we're just going to learn about it.
Yeah,
Not that we love it.
Thanks, Sean.
yeah.